I killed my dog with kindness and saved a monster with madness. But when 3 hunters kicked down my door in the middle of a blizzard, I finally understood. Sometimes the monster is the only thing standing between your granddaughter and death. My name is Elias Crawford. I'm 60 years old, and I've lived in these Wyoming mountains long enough to know that nature doesn't do mercy. Nature does survival. Nature does balance. So when I found that white wolf in the trap, bleeding out in the January snow with eyes like molten gold, every instinct I had screamed at me to end it quick and clean. 1 bullet, no suffering. That's the code up here. I didn't pull the trigger. Instead, I did something I can't explain even now, a year later. Sitting here in my rebuilt cabin with snow falling outside and my granddaughter asleep in the next room, I carried that 100-pound killing machine home, stitched it up on my kitchen table with fishing line and whiskey, let it heal in my woodshed while my conscience and my common sense went to war. They say wolves don't bond with humans. They say wild things stay wild no matter how much you bleed for them. They're right about that. But they're also wrong. Because 3 weeks later, when those men came for what they thought was theirs, $40,000 of exotic pelt and taxidermy, that wolf made a choice. And so did I. This is the story of what happened when mercy met violence in the mountains, when a dying predator became a guardian, when an old man and a little girl learned that sometimes salvation has teeth. They call him the White Ghost now, the king of the Rockies. Hunters tell stories about him in bars, their voices dropping to whispers like they're afraid saying his name too loud will summon him. But I knew him different. I knew him as Yukon. And this is how a man, a child, and a beast saved each other in the worst blizzard Wyoming had seen in 20 years. This is a true story. Every word of it. I've got the scars to prove it. The forest had gone quiet in that particular way. That meant something was wrong. Elias Crawford stopped mid-step, his breath forming small clouds in the January air. 60 years of living in these Wyoming mountains had taught him to read silence, like other men read newspapers. This wasn't the peaceful quiet of snowfall or the held-breath hush before a storm. This was the silence of fear, when every living thing had gone still and watchful. Then he heard it. Metal against metal, faint but rhythmic. Click, 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 click. He found the source 20 yards off the deer trail, in a small clearing where the pines thinned out. The wolf was enormous, easily 100 pounds, its coat so white it seemed to glow against the dark trees. It sat perfectly still in the rusted bear trap, one massive paw caught in the serrated jaws. Blood had turned the snow around it into a spreading crimson pool, already starting to freeze in the cold. Elias had seen plenty of trapped animals in his time. They usually did one of 2 things. They screamed and thrashed until they broke themselves, or they went glassy-eyed with shock and waited to die. This wolf did neither. It watched him approach with eyes the color of amber, its gaze level and unblinking. No whimpering, no struggling. Just that steady, burning stare that seemed to look straight through him and find him wanting. The wolf's lips pulled back slightly, revealing teeth designed for ending things. But it didn't growl. It simply waited, muscles coiled, ready to lunge if he came within range. Elias unslung the rifle from his shoulder. The smart thing, the merciful thing, would be one clean shot. Every hunter knew it. You didn't leave an animal to suffer, and you sure as hell didn't mess with a predator this size. The wolf was already dead, it just didn't know it yet. The trap had gone bone deep. Even if he somehow freed it, infection would finish what the steel had started. His finger found the trigger. The wolf's eyes never left his face. 3 minutes. That's how long Elias stood there, rifle raised, while his hands slowly went numb in the cold. 3 minutes of that ancient stare holding him in place like a second trap. He'd killed deer, elk, even a mountain lion once. None of them had looked at him like this, like an equal, like a warrior who'd chosen death over surrender but wasn't about to make it easy. "Ah, hell," Elias muttered, lowering the rifle. The wolf's ears flicked forward, the first movement it had made. What happened next would seem insane to anyone who heard about it later, and Elias knew it even as he was doing it. He circled around to the wolf's blind side, moving slow, talking in a low, steady stream of nonsense about what a damn fool he was. The wolf tracked him with those yellow eyes, but held still, as if it understood that this particular human had chosen a different path than the bullet. Getting the trap open was the easy part. Getting close enough to do it without losing his face was harder. Elias used his coat, throwing it over the wolf's head in one quick motion before jamming a thick branch between its jaws. The animal exploded into motion, thrashing and snapping. But the trap's spring was already released, and the jaws fell open. The wolf should have run, should have limped away into the trees and disappeared like smoke. Instead, when Elias pulled his coat away, it tried to stand and collapsed. The leg that had been trapped hung useless, blood still pumping out onto the snow in rhythmic spurts. Elias looked at the wolf. The wolf looked back at him, panting now, its strength finally giving out. "Can't leave you like this either," Elias said. He took off his flannel shirt despite the cold, wrapped it around the bleeding leg tight as a tourniquet, and lifted. 40 pounds of dead weight, plus 40 more of fighting animal that wasn't quite ready to trust the hands that held it. The wolf's head lolled back, teeth inches from his throat, but it didn't bite, didn't even try. The walk back to his truck took 30 minutes that felt like hours. By the time Elias got there, his arms were shaking and the wolf had gone limp, either unconscious or dead. He couldn't tell which and didn't have time to check. He laid it in the truck bed, threw a tarp over it, and started the engine. Halfway down the mountain road, he caught sight of it in his rearview mirror. The wolf had lifted its head and was staring at him through the back window, those amber eyes cutting through the darkness of the truck bed like headlights. Elias had no idea what he'd just brought into his life. He only knew that the silence in the forest hadn't been about the wolf at all. It had been about him and the choice he was about to make. A choice that would change everything. The cabin smelled like wood smoke and old coffee. Elias kicked the door shut behind him and laid the wolf on his kitchen table, shoving aside the breakfast dishes he hadn't bothered to wash. The animal's breathing came shallow and fast, its white fur matted dark with blood. He'd done field dressing on deer plenty of times. This was different. This was surgery, and he had no business attempting it. Elias grabbed the whiskey from above the sink, the needle and fishing line from his tackle box, and the pliers he used for pulling nails. Not sterile, not proper, but it was what he had. He poured whiskey over everything, including his own shaking hands, and took a long pull from the bottle for himself. The wolf's eyes opened as he approached. Still that same level stare, but something had shifted in it. Not trust exactly, more like resignation, like the animal understood it had run out of options, and this was the hand fate had dealt. "Going to tie your mouth shut," Elias said, reaching for the leather belt hanging by the door. "You bite me. We both know how this ends." He wrapped the belt around the wolf's muzzle, cinching it tight. The animal's whole body went rigid, muscles standing out like cables under the fur. Elias half expected it to thrash, to fight. but it just lay there trembling. The leg was worse than he'd thought. The trap had crushed through skin and muscle, exposing bone. He had to clean it first, pick out the rust and debris with the pliers, while the wolf's body jerked with each touch. No sound came from behind the muzzle, but Elias could see the pain in every quiver, every sharp intake of breath. His hands were slick with blood and whiskey when he started stitching. The needle punched through skin that was too thick, too tough. He had to force it, pull hard on the fishing line to close the gaps. Halfway through, his concentration slipped. Just for a second, just long enough. The wolf's head snapped sideways, belt and all, and caught his forearm. Teeth scraped across skin, not quite breaking through, but close enough that Elias felt the pressure of jaws that could crack elk bones. He froze. The wolf froze. Their blood mixed in the space between them, red on red, impossible to tell which belonged to whom. Then the wolf released him and turned its head away, as if ashamed. Elias finished the stitching with his heart hammering against his ribs. When he finally stepped back, the kitchen looked like an abattoir. Blood on the table, blood on the floor, blood soaked into the knees of his jeans. The wolf lay still as death, except for the slight rise and fall of its chest. He carried it to the storage room off the kitchen, the space he used for firewood and tools, laid it on a pile of old blankets, and left a bowl of water within reach. The wolf didn't move, didn't acknowledge him, just kept breathing those shallow, painful breaths. Elias locked the door from the outside and walked back to survey the wreckage of his kitchen. The whiskey bottle was half empty on the counter. He picked it up, thought about finishing it, then set it back down. What had he done? The question sat heavy in his chest. He'd just brought a wild predator into his home, a creature built for killing, and patched it up like some kind of pet. The wolf wasn't grateful, wasn't tame. Given half a chance and its strength back, it would probably tear his throat out. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Elias looked at the locked storage room door and wondered if he'd just saved a life or invited death to sleep under his roof. Maya arrived on a Tuesday morning with a pink backpack and eyes that had seen too much for 8 years old. Elias watched his son's truck disappear back down the mountain road, leaving a trail of dust and unspoken accusations. David hadn't said much, just that the divorce was getting ugly and Maya needed somewhere stable for a few weeks, somewhere away from lawyers and screaming matches and a mother who'd started drinking before noon. The girl stood on his porch like a refugee, small and silent. "You hungry?" Elias asked. She shook her head. "You lie as bad as your daddy did at your age." He held the door open. "Come on." The wolf had been in the storage room for 3 days now. Elias had been checking on it twice daily, bringing water and raw meat that mostly went untouched. The animal would lift its head when he entered, watch him with those calculating eyes, then look away as if his presence bored it. The leg was holding, no signs of infection yet, but the wolf barely moved except to drink. Elias hadn't planned on explaining any of this to Maya. His plan was to keep her occupied with books and old movies, let her decompress in the quiet of the mountain, and keep her far away from the dangerous wild animal he'd stupidly decided to rehabilitate. That plan lasted exactly 6 hours. He found her missing just after lunch. Her backpack was still in the guest room, her jacket still on the coat rack. He called her name, got no answer, and felt his chest tighten. The cabin wasn't large, which meant she'd gone outside, which meant she could be anywhere in 100 acres of forest where a kid her size could fall into a ravine or stumble onto a bear den or simply get turned around and lost. Then he heard it. A voice soft and high, coming from the storage room. The door was cracked open. Elias had locked it. He was certain he'd locked it. But the old mechanism must have finally given up. He moved quiet as he could, every instinct screaming at him to rush in and grab her. But rushing around wild animals was how people got hurt. Maya sat cross-legged on the floor about 3 feet from the wolf, talking to it in that rambling way children talk when they don't expect answers. "My mom says I ask too many questions," she was saying. "She says it gives her headaches. Does it give you headaches when people talk? You don't look like you get headaches. You look like you don't care about anything." The wolf's head was up, ears forward, watching her with an intensity that made Elias's hand move to the rifle he'd left in the kitchen. Stupid. So stupid to leave it there. Maya reached out one small hand, fingers extended toward the wolf's massive head. "Maya, don't." But she'd already made contact, her palm resting between the wolf's ears, right where the white fur was thickest. Elias couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only watch as the wolf's eyes half closed and its head lowered just slightly, accepting the touch. A long exhale came from deep in its chest. Not quite a growl, more like a sigh. The kind of sound something makes when it's been holding itself tense for too long and finally allows itself to rest. Maya scratched behind its ears like it was a dog. The wolf tolerated this with what Elias could only describe as weary patience. "You need a name," Maya said. "Grandpa probably just calls you the wolf because he's boring like that. I'm going to call you Yukon. That's a place in Canada where it's cold and there are lots of wolves. My teacher showed us on a map." "Maya?" Elias kept his voice level, calm. "I need you to stand up slowly and walk to me." She looked over her shoulder at him, her hand still on Yukon's head. "Why? We're just talking. That's not a pet. That's a wild animal, and wild animals are unpredictable. He's not going to hurt me." She said it with the absolute certainty of childhood, that unshakable faith that the world makes sense and follows rules. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." She turned back to the wolf. "You wouldn't hurt me, would you, Yukon?" The wolf's amber eyes shifted from the girl to Elias, and for a moment something passed between them. An understanding, maybe, or a warning. The animal's gaze said clearly, "I could. I absolutely could. But I won't." Then it laid its head down on the blankets, Maya's hand still resting on its neck, and closed its eyes. Elias let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. "Come on, kiddo. Let's let him rest. Can I come back and visit him? We'll talk about it. That means yes." Maya stood up, gave the wolf one last pat, and skipped past Elias out of the storage room. Elias looked at Yukon one more time before pulling the door shut. The wolf's eyes opened briefly, met his, then closed again. Something had shifted. Some invisible line had been crossed. The animal had made a choice, and Elias wasn't entirely sure what that choice meant. He only knew that the most dangerous predator in these mountains had just decided an 8-year-old girl was worth protecting. The town of Ridgway sat in a valley like something left behind by progress. 2 streets, 1 stoplight that hadn't worked in years, and a population that peaked at maybe 300 when you counted the ranch hands. Elias drove past the feed store and the post office. Maya strapped into the passenger seat, watching the world go by with the quiet alertness of someone used to disappointment. "I need to stop at the pharmacy," he said. "Won't take long." "Can I get a candy bar?" "You can get 2 if you promise not to tell your father I'm rotting your teeth." That got a small smile out of her, the first real one he'd seen since she arrived. The pharmacy doubled as a general store, selling everything from antibiotics to fishing lures. Elias grabbed what he needed for Yukon's leg, some extra bandages, and a bottle of stronger antiseptic than the whiskey he'd been using. The pharmacist, old Tom Henley, didn't ask questions. In a town this small, people learned when to mind their business. Back outside, Maya had her candy bars and was waiting by the truck, staring across the street at Cooper's bar. Even in daylight, the place looked dim and uninviting, the kind of establishment that opened at 10 in the morning for people who'd already decided the day wasn't worth facing sober. "Stay here," Elias said. "I need to talk to someone." He didn't really. But Bill Cooper sometimes had information, the kind that flowed freely when men had enough whiskey in them to forget discretion. Elias wanted to know if anyone had been asking about wolves, about traps, about a white ghost that supposedly roamed the high country. The bar smelled like cigarettes and spilled beer. 3 men sat at the counter, and 2 more occupied a corner booth. Elias recognized most of them, ranch hands and retired loggers, harmless enough. But the man standing at the bar with his back to the door was new. He was tall, maybe 40, dressed in expensive hunting gear that had never seen real work. His jacket was one of those technical shells that cost more than Elias's truck payment, and his boots had the kind of pristine leather that meant he spent more time shopping than hiking. Elias Crawford. Bill Cooper nodded from behind the bar. "Don't usually see you in here before sundown." "Just passing through. Thought I'd stop in." The tall man turned around, and Elias felt something cold settle in his gut. The guy had eyes like a banker, the kind that calculated value before seeing humanity. A thin scar ran from his left ear to his jaw, the sort of mark that came from something with claws. "You're Crawford?" The man's voice was smooth, educated. "Vance Holbrook. I've been hoping to run into you." Elias didn't offer his hand. "That so? I understand you know these mountains better than anyone. I'm looking for something, and I'm willing to pay for reliable information. I don't guide hunters. Try the outfitter service in Jackson. This isn't about elk or mule deer." Vance pulled out his phone, swiped to a photo. "I'm tracking this." The image showed a massive white wolf, photographed at distance with a telephoto lens. It was standing on a ridge, backlit by dawn, looking every bit the ghost the locals whispered about. Elias kept his expression neutral. "Never seen it," he lied. "Really? Because my trap was interfered with 3 days ago. Same area where you hunt. Trap was sprung, blood trail led away, and my prize was gone." Vance's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's a $40,000 animal, Mr. Crawford. Pelt alone is worth 20 to the right buyer. I've got a collector in Dubai who's willing to double that for a full mount." "40,000 for a wolf?" "For that wolf. White-faced timber wolves are rare enough. One this size, this pure. It's a genetic anomaly, one of a kind." Vance leaned against the bar. "So you can understand why I'm motivated to find it, and why I'm unhappy someone decided to play hero." The threat hung in the air between them, polite and clear. "Like I said, never seen it. Mountain's a big place. Could be halfway to Montana by now. Could be." Vance drained his beer. "Or could be someone's keeping it close, nursing it back to health like some kind of Disney movie. That would be stupid, though. Wild animals don't do gratitude, they do survival. And when that wolf heals up, whoever's been playing doctor is going to learn a hard lesson about nature." One of Vance's companions, a shorter man with the shoulders of a wrestler and a face that had taken too many punches, spoke up from the booth. "We've been checking the area, boss. Found some tire tracks on the old logging road. Truck bed had blood in the snow where someone parked." "Interesting." Vance's eyes never left Elias. "You drive a truck, don't you, Mr. Crawford? Half the county drives trucks." But not everyone was in that particular spot at that particular time. Vance pushed off from the bar, moved close enough that Elias could smell expensive cologne. "I'm going to find that wolf. Whether it's wandering free or locked up in someone's shed, I'm going to find it. And when I do, I'm going to skin it and ship it overseas and collect my money. Anyone who gets in my way is going to discover I don't have a lot of patience for obstacles." Elias held his ground. "You threatening me?" "I'm educating you. There's a difference." Vance dropped a 50 on the bar. "Bill, next round's on me. Mr. Crawford, if you happen to remember seeing anything useful, I'm staying. At the Pines Motel, room 12. Day or night, I'm very interested in information." He walked out, his two companions following like trained dogs. Bill Cooper whistled low. "That boy's got a mean streak." "Yeah." Elias watched through the window as Vance climbed into a black SUV with California plates. "He does." Outside, Maya was still waiting by the truck, oblivious to the danger that had just walked past her. Elias unlocked the doors and climbed in, his hands steadier than he felt. "Who was that man?" Maya asked. "Nobody important." But as he pulled out of the parking lot, Elias caught sight of Vance's SUV in his rearview mirror, following at a distance, and knew he'd just lied to his granddaughter twice in one day. Yukon started walking on the 4th day. Elias heard the scraping sound from the storage room around midnight, a rhythmic dragging like furniture being moved. He grabbed the flashlight and the rifle, moved quiet down the hallway in his socks. Maya was asleep in the guest room, her door closed. He eased the storage room door open and swept the light inside. The wolf stood in the center of the room, weight balanced on 3 legs, the injured front paw held slightly off the ground. It had torn apart the blanket nest Elias had made, scattered the water bowl, and was testing its mobility with the methodical patience of something that understood weakness meant death. When the light hit it, Yukon's head swung toward him, eyes catching the beam and reflecting it back gold and bright. No fear in that gaze. Just calculation. The wolf took one limping step forward, then another, working the damaged leg despite what had to be considerable pain. "Stubborn," Elias muttered. "You're as stubborn as me." He brought fresh water and more venison, watched as the wolf ignored both and continued its slow pacing. Back and forth across the small room, building strength, refusing to give in to the injury. There was something almost human in its determination, something that reminded Elias of his own recovery after he'd taken shrapnel in his leg during Desert Storm. The doctors said he'd limp forever. He'd proven them wrong through sheer spite. The wolf stopped at the single window, stood on its hind legs with front paws against the sill, and stared out into the darkness. Its whole body had gone rigid, every muscle tensed. A low rumble started in its chest, too quiet to be a growl, more like an engine idling. Elias moved to the window, looked out at the same view. Nothing but trees and shadows, and the distant mountains outlined against the star-filled sky. "What is it?" But Yukon wouldn't look at him, just kept staring with that terrible focus at something Elias couldn't see. He left the wolf there and went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easy. When it finally did, it was thin and restless, full of dreams about amber eyes and steel traps. Morning came gray and cold. Elias woke to silence, which was wrong. His dog, an old shepherd mix, named Tucker, always barked when the sun came up, demanding breakfast and attention in equal measure. No barking today. Elias pulled on his jeans and boots and walked out onto the front porch. Tucker's chain was attached to his post, the metal links gleaming with frost. But Tucker wasn't on the other end. He found the dog 20 feet away, near the tree line. Tucker lay on his side in a position that might have looked peaceful if not for the angle of his neck and the blood that had soaked into the ground beneath him. His skull had been crushed with something heavy, something swung with enough force to kill instantly. No struggle, no warning. Just brutal, efficient violence. Elias knelt beside the body, placed a hand on fur that was already going stiff with cold and death. Tucker had been 14 years old, half-blind, no threat to anyone. Killing him wasn't about eliminating danger, it was about sending a message. A few feet away, Elias spotted the boot print in the frost. Size 11 or 12, tread pattern from an expensive hiking boot. The same kind Vance had been wearing at the bar. He heard the screen door creak and turned to see Maya standing on the porch in her pajamas, looking at the scene with eyes that were already filling with tears. Is Tucker dead? Elias stood up, moved between her and the dog's body. Yes, sweetheart, he is. What happened? He was old. His heart probably just gave out. The lie tasted like copper in his mouth, but she didn't need the truth, not yet. Can we bury him? After breakfast? She went back inside, and Elias took another look around the property. There were more boot prints near the side of the house, close to the storage room window. Someone had been here in the night, checking, watching, trying to see what Elias was hiding. From inside the house came a sound that made his blood run cold. A deep, sustained growl that rattled the windows, the kind of noise that bypassed the thinking brain and went straight to the primal cortex that remembered when humans were prey. Elias ran inside. Maya stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the storage room door. The growling was coming from behind it, punctuated now by the sound of claws scraping on wood. He knows, Maya whispered. Yukon knows something's wrong. Elias opened the door carefully. Yukon stood at the window, hackles raised in a ridge of white fur down his spine, teeth bared, making that terrible sound. The wolf's head turned toward him briefly, and in its eyes, Elias saw something that made his hands shake. Recognition, understanding. The wolf had smelled the intruder, had sensed the threat while they all slept, helpless and unaware. And now it was angry. Easy, Elias said, knowing the word meant nothing but needing to say something. Easy, boy. Yukon turned back to the window, and the growling shifted to something higher, sharper. Not a warning anymore. A promise. Elias looked out at the forest, at the boot prints in the frost, at his dead dog lying in the cold morning light. Vance had made his move. The polite threats in the bar had evolved into action, and this was just the opening shot. He thought about calling the sheriff. But what would he say? That someone had killed his dog and left footprints? That he was hiding an illegal wild animal, and now the man who wanted to skin it was escalating? The law wouldn't help him here. The law would probably take Yukon and put him down as a dangerous predator. No. This was between him and Vance now. Between a man who saw the wolf as merchandise and a stubborn old veteran who'd made a choice in the forest and was too proud to admit he'd been wrong. Elias closed the storage room door and went to get his shovel. He had a dog to bury and a granddaughter to protect and a wolf that was healing faster than he'd expected. And somewhere out there, Vance Holbrook was planning his next move. The storm came in fast the way they always did in the Rockies, rolling over the peaks like a living thing. Elias watched it approach from the kitchen window while Maya ate her cereal in silence. She hadn't said much since they'd buried Tucker that morning, just went through the motions with the blank efficiency of a child who'd learned not to expect good things to last. "Going to be a big one," Elias said. "More to fill the quiet than anything else. Weather Service says 12 to 18 inches. Maya looked up from her bowl. "Will we lose power?" "Probably. We've got the generator, though, and plenty of firewood." What he didn't say was that the storm would cut them off completely. His nearest neighbor was 4 miles down a road that became impassable in heavy snow. No one would be getting in or out until the plows came through. And that could take days, depending on how bad it got. He tried the phone around noon. Dead line. Not the dull silence of no one answering, but complete absence of signal, the kind that meant a wire was down somewhere. Could be the storm. Could be something else. Elias walked the perimeter of his property, ostensibly checking the generator and bringing in extra wood, but really looking for signs of another visit. The boot prints from the morning had been covered by fresh snow, and he found nothing new. Still, the back of his neck prickled with the feeling of being watched. By 3 in the afternoon, the world had turned white. Snow fell so thick Elias couldn't see the tree line from his porch. The wind howled around the cabin, finding every gap in the walls, making the old structure creak and groan. He'd lived through dozens of storms like this. But today it felt different. Today it felt like a cage closing. Maya sat on the floor near the wood stove, playing with a deck of cards, building and rebuilding the same house over and over. The storage room door was cracked open, and Yukon lay just inside, watching her with those amber eyes. The wolf had stopped growling but hadn't relaxed. Its ears kept swiveling toward the windows, tracking sounds only it could hear. Elias checked his rifle for the 3rd time. It was an old Remington 700, same one he'd hunted with for 30 years. He'd cleaned it after the last deer season, but that had been months ago. He worked the bolt, felt it catch slightly, not quite smooth. When had he last oiled it properly? When had maintenance become something he let slide? He found the gun oil in the hall closet, sat down at the kitchen table, and started field stripping the weapon. Maya watched him from the floor. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Of the storm?" "Nah, we're safe here." "That's not what I meant." Elias looked at his granddaughter, saw his son in the shape of her face, and her mother in the directness of her gaze. 8 years old, and already she could read people better than most adults. "Yeah," he admitted. "A little. Because of the man from town. You're too smart for your own good, you know that? Mom always said I get it from you." She paused, rebuilt her card house. "Is he going to hurt Yukon?" "Not if I can help it." "What if you can't?" That was the question, wasn't it? What if the storm kept them trapped here while Vance and his men came calling? What if the old rifle jammed at the wrong moment? What if he was just a 60-year-old man who'd bitten off more than he could chew? The lights flickered once, twice, then died. The refrigerator's hum cut out, leaving only the sound of wind and the soft crackle of fire in the wood stove. Elias found the flashlight and the battery-powered lantern, got them both lit before the cabin settled into the gray, half-dark of stormlight through windows. "Is the generator broken?" Maya's voice was small in the darkness. "Shouldn't be. Let me check." The generator sat in a shed 30 feet from the house. Elias pulled on his coat and hat, grabbed the flashlight, and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit him like a fist, driving snow into his face, hard enough to sting. He made his way to the shed, mostly by memory, found the door, yanked it open. The generator was fine. The fuel line wasn't. Someone had cut it clean through with a knife or wire cutters, leaving the severed ends lying in the snow that had blown in through the shed's gaps. Elias stood there in the howling wind, holding the flashlight on the cut line, and felt fear crystallize into something colder and more useful. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. Vance wanted them isolated, wanted them vulnerable, wanted to come in when the storm made escape impossible and help a distant dream. He went back to the house, shook the snow off in the mudroom. Maya looked up when he came in, read his face, and didn't ask questions. "We're going to be without power for a while," Elias said, "but we'll be fine. I need you to stay inside, away from the windows, okay?" "Okay." From the storage room came a sound like nothing Elias had ever heard from the wolf before. Not a growl or a howl, but something. Between them, a rising note of fury that made the hair stand up on his arms. Yukon was at the window again, clawing at the frame, trying to get through the glass. Elias moved to the window, looked out into the white chaos of the storm. At first he saw nothing but snow and wind. Then a shadow moved near the tree line, man-shaped, there and gone. Another shadow to the left, a third one circling toward the back of the house. They were here. In the storm, in the failing light, Vance and his men had come for the wolf they thought was worth $40,000. They'd cut the phone lines and sabotaged the generator, and now they were closing in, betting that an old man and a little girl wouldn't put up much of a fight. Elias picked up the rifle, chambered a round, and heard the mechanism stick halfway. The bolt wouldn't close all the way, the action gummed up with old oil that had turned to varnish over months of neglect. He looked at Maya, at the useless rifle, at Yukon clawing desperately at the window. Outside, the shadows were getting closer. "Get in the bathroom," Elias said quietly. "Lock the door and don't come out until I tell you." "Grandpa." "Now, Maya. Right now." She ran. The bathroom door slammed and the lock clicked. Yukon stopped clawing at the window and turned to look at Elias, and in that moment they understood each other perfectly. They were out of time, out of options, and the storm had turned the cabin into a trap. The front door exploded inward with a second kick, snow and splinters flying into the living room. Vance came through first, a pistol in one hand and a tranquilizer rifle in the other. His two men followed, the big one carrying a shotgun and the smaller one wielding a cattle prod that crackled with blue electricity. "Crawford!" Vance shook snow off his shoulders like he was arriving for a social call. "Let's keep this simple. Give me the wolf and we leave. Everyone goes home happy." Elias stood near the wood stove, the jammed rifle at his feet where he'd dropped it in disgust. His hands were empty and visible. "There's a child in this house." "I know. That's unfortunate." Vance moved deeper into the room, his men spreading out to flank him. "But this doesn't have to get ugly. The wolf's in that storage room, isn't it? I can smell the damn thing from here." From behind the cracked door came a sound that made the temperature in the room seem to drop 10 degrees. A growl so deep it was almost subsonic, felt more in the chest than heard with the ears. "See, that's exactly what I'm talking about." Vance gestured with the tranquilizer rifle. "That animal is dangerous. You're doing everyone a favor by letting me take it off your hands. I'll even throw in $5,000 for your trouble. Call it a finder's fee. Get out of my house. Or what? You going to shoot me with that antique?" Vance kicked the rifle. It skittered across the floor. "That thing hasn't worked right in years. You know it. I know it." The big man moved toward the storage room. Elias stepped to block him and got a shotgun barrel shoved into his chest for his trouble. "Don't be stupid," the big man said. "Jake, hold him there." Vance walked to the storage room door, pushed it fully open with his boot. Hello, gorgeous. Ready to make me rich? Yukon stood in the center of the room, head lowered, teeth bared in a rictus of pure hate. The injured leg was still bandaged, but the wolf was putting weight on it now, all four paws planted. Its eyes locked on Vance with an intelligence that was almost human. Beautiful, Vance breathed. Absolutely magnificent. You're going to look perfect on that wall in Dubai. He raised the tranquilizer rifle. Yukon didn't move, didn't flinch, just kept staring with those burning amber eyes. The gunshot was deafening in the small space. Elias had managed to pull a hunting knife from his boot and slash at the big man's arm, causing the shotgun to discharge into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. The big man backhanded Elias across the face, sending him sprawling. In the chaos, the third man rushed forward toward the bathroom where Maya was hiding, thinking maybe a hostage would speed things along. He made it 3 steps before Yukon hit him. The wolf came out of the storage room like something launched from a cannon, a blur of white fury that closed the distance faster than thought. The chain Elias had looped around the wood stove for safety snapped like thread. Yukon's jaws closed on the man's gun arm, and there was a wet cracking sound, bone breaking under pressure designed to kill elk. The man screamed. The cattle prod fell from his other hand, still sparking on the floor. Vance spun, tried to aim the tranquilizer rifle, but Yukon was already moving again, bleeding from where his stitches had torn but operating on pure predatory instinct. The wolf went low, grabbed Vance's ankle, and pulled. Vance went down hard, the tranquilizer rifle firing wild into the wall. The big man recovered, swung his shotgun around at the wolf. Elias grabbed the rifle off the floor and threw it, the stock catching Jake in the temple. Not enough to drop him, but enough to spoil his aim. Yukon released Vance and circled back toward Maya's hiding spot, planting himself between the bathroom door and the intruders. Blood dripped from his shoulder where the stitches had completely torn away, but he showed no sign of pain or weakness. Just stood there, a white guardian covered in red, daring anyone to try getting past him. Vance scrambled backward, his expensive jacket torn, his face pale. "Shoot it! Jake, shoot the damn thing!" But Jake was looking at the wolf with something close to religious fear. The smaller man was on the ground, cradling his ruined arm and weeping. No one moved to raise a weapon. From outside came a sound that changed everything. Sirens. Distant but getting closer. The wail of the sheriff's 4-wheel drive cutting through the storm. "Someone called the cops," Jake said. "Impossible. We cut the..." Vance stopped, looked at Elias. "The neighbor?" "Hunting buddy?" Elias said, tasting blood from his split lip. "Checks on me every storm. When I didn't answer the landline, he got worried." It was a lie. No one was coming. But Vance didn't know that, and the fear in his eyes said he believed it. "We're leaving?" Vance got to his feet, backing toward the broken door. "This isn't over." "Yeah, it is." Elias stood up, every joint aching. "You come back here. I'll kill you myself. Badge or no badge watching." They left, half carrying their injured companion, disappearing into the white fury of the storm. Elias watched until they were gone, then locked what remained of the door and turned to find Yukon collapsed on the floor, breathing hard, blood pooling beneath him. Maya came out of the bathroom before Elias could stop her. She took one look at Yukon lying in the spreading pool of blood and dropped to her knees beside him, her small hands hovering over his torn shoulder like she wanted to help but didn't know where to start. "He's dying," she whispered. "Not yet, he's not." Elias grabbed towels from the kitchen, the cleanest ones he had. "Hold these here. Press down hard." She did what she was told while Elias ran for the medical supplies, what little remained after the first surgery. His hands were shaking worse than before, partly from adrenaline and partly from the knowledge that he was out of his depth. The shoulder wound was bad deep, and the leg had opened up completely. Yukon had burned through weeks of healing in 30 seconds of violence. The wolf's breathing came shallow and fast. Its eyes were half closed, the fire in them dimmed to embers. When Elias knelt beside it with the needle and thread, Yukon didn't even flinch. Just lay there accepting whatever came next with the same stoic resignation it had shown in the trap. "Talk to him," Elias said to Maya as he started working. "Keep him here with us." She leaned close to the wolf's head, stroking the white fur between its ears with blood-stained fingers. "You saved me. You didn't have to, but you did. That makes you a hero, Yukon. Heroes don't get to die in living rooms. They get parades and medals, and people write songs about them." Her voice was steady, but tears ran down her face, dripping onto the wolf's fur. Elias stitched in the dim light of the lantern, working by feel as much as sight. The shoulder took 43 stitches. The leg took 60. His fingers cramped, and his back screamed from bending over, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. This animal had stood between his granddaughter and men with guns, had chosen to protect rather than flee despite every instinct telling it to run. By the time he finished, 3 hours had passed. The storm still raged outside, rattling the windows, but inside the cabin had gone quiet except for the crackling fire and Yukon's labored breathing. "Is he going to make it?" Maya asked. "I don't know." She curled up on the floor next to the wolf, her head resting against its side, rising and falling with each breath. Elias covered them both with a blanket and sat back against the wall, the useless rifle across his lap, watching the broken door for any sign of Vance's return. Dawn came gray and cold. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried under 2 feet of fresh snow. Elias woke from a half-sleep to find Yukon still breathing, still alive. Maya was asleep with one hand buried in the wolf's fur. The sound of an engine cut through the morning silence. Elias was on his feet instantly, rifle raised despite knowing it wouldn't fire. But the vehicle that pulled up wasn't Vance's black SUV. It was Sheriff Tom Bradley's Bronco, red and blue lights flashing. Tom came through the broken door with his hand on his sidearm, took in the scene with professional assessment, the blood on the floor, the shattered ceiling plaster, the white wolf lying bandaged and broken in the middle of it all. "Elias, what the hell happened here?" "Home invasion. 3 men. They wanted the wolf." "I can see that." Tom holstered his weapon, knelt beside Yukon. "This the white ghost everyone's been talking about?" "Yeah." "You know, I got a call this morning. Guy named Vance Holbrook at the clinic getting his arm patched up. Says a wild animal attacked him unprovoked. Says it's living here with you and a minor child constitutes a public danger." Elias felt his stomach drop. "Tom, I also got another call from Vance's associate, who broke his arm in 3 places. He was crying and praying and apparently feeling real guilty about breaking into someone's home during a blizzard to steal property." Tom stood up, looked Elias in the eye. "Told me everything. How Vance cut your phone lines and sabotaged your generator. How they kicked in your door with intent to commit theft and possibly kidnapping. So you're not here to take the wolf?" Tom was quiet for a long moment. "Law says any wild animal that attacks a human gets put down, Elias. No exceptions. I'm supposed to call Fish and Wildlife. Have them send someone out here to handle it." Maya woke up, looked at the sheriff with red-rimmed eyes that had seen too much. "But," Tom continued, I'm also supposed to arrest Vance Holbrook for about 6 different felonies. And in my report, it's going to say that this wolf was defending its territory and the occupants of this residence from armed intruders. Self-defense, even for animals, muddies the legal water considerable. What are you saying? I'm saying you got about 4 hours before the state boys arrive, and this becomes their jurisdiction. I'm saying that Wolf is in no condition to survive in the wild right now. But there's a federal preserve about 90 miles north where rehabilitation animals sometimes get released. Tom pulled out a business card, set it on the table. And I'm saying I got held up by the snow clearing the roads. Won't be able to file my report until this afternoon, at the earliest. Elias took the card. It had a phone number and an address for the Shoshone National Forest Preserve. Thank you, Tom. Don't thank me. Just get that animal somewhere safe before I have to make this official. He looked down at Maya. You okay, honey? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Tom left the way he'd come, and Elias stood there holding the card, looking at Yukon barely clinging to life, and wondered how in hell they were going to move a 100-pound wolf 90 miles in 4 hours. They almost didn't make it out of the driveway. Elias had carried Yukon to the truck bed, lined it with every blanket he owned, and secured the wolf as gently as possible. Maya climbed into the passenger seat without being asked, her pink backpack on her lap like armor. The engine turned over on the third try, coughing blue smoke into the freezing air. The county road was a nightmare of ice and snow drifts. Elias drove 15 miles an hour, white-knuckling the steering wheel every time the truck fishtailed. Behind them, through the rear window, he could see Yukon's white form barely moving under the pile of blankets. They were 20 miles out when Maya spoke. He's not going to make it, is he? Elias wanted to lie, to tell her everything would be fine, but she deserved better than false hope. I don't know, sweetheart. If he dies, it's because he saved me. If he dies, it's because some greedy bastard set a trap where he shouldn't have. Elias glanced at her. Don't you take that weight on. Yukon made his choice back there. He could have run when that door broke open, could have disappeared into the woods and been free. He chose to stay. Why? Because some things matter more than freedom. Some things are worth fighting for even when the odds are bad. They drove in silence after that, racing against a clock only Elias could see. Every minute that passed was another minute closer to the state wildlife officers arriving at his cabin with tranquilizer guns and body bags. Tom had bought them time, but time was a currency that ran out fast. The preserve entrance appeared through the snow like a mirage. A wooden gate with a ranger station, currently unstaffed because of the storm. Elias didn't stop at the gate, just drove around it and followed the signs deeper into protected land. 5 miles in, he found what he was looking for. A service road that led to a wide clearing where the forest opened up into pristine wilderness. Mountains rose in the distance, white and eternal. No roads beyond this point, no human habitation for 50 miles in any direction. This was the edge of the world that Yukon belonged to. Elias parked the truck and climbed out. The cold hit him like a wall, 30 degrees below freezing with wind chill. He lowered the tailgate and looked at the wolf. Yukon's eyes were open, watching him with that same measuring stare from the first day. This is it, Elias said quietly. This is as far as I can take you. He lifted Yukon as carefully as he could, felt the animal's weight in his arms like a trust being placed. Maya had gotten out of the truck and stood in the snow watching, her face streaked with tears that froze on her cheeks. Elias carried the wolf 20 yards into the clearing and set him down in a spot where the sun was breaking through the clouds, warming a patch of snow. He began unwrapping the bandages, working fast because his fingers were going numb. "What are you doing?" Maya asked. "Setting him free. The bandages will only trap moisture and cause infection out here. He's either strong enough to make it, or he's not." The last bandage came away from the shoulder wound. The stitches held, ugly and functional. Yukon tried to stand, got his legs under him, and promptly collapsed back into the snow. "He can't walk," Maya said. "Grandpa, he can't even walk." "Then he'll learn, or he'll die here in the sun instead of on a table with strangers injecting poison into his veins." Elias stood up, stepped back. "Come on, sweetheart. We have to go." "No." Maya moved forward, knelt in the snow beside Yukon. "We can't just leave him like this. We don't have a choice. There's always a choice. You told me that. You said Yukon chose to stay and fight. Well, I'm choosing to stay with him until he can stand." Elias looked at his granddaughter, at this small, fierce creature who'd seen her world fall apart and was now refusing to let one more thing die without a fight. He looked at his watch. They had maybe 2 hours before Fish and Wildlife arrived at his cabin and started asking questions Tom couldn't deflect. 15 minutes, he said. "That's all we've got." Maya nodded and turned her attention back to Yukon, talking to him in that soft, steady voice she'd used during the long night. Telling him about the mountains, about the freedom waiting for him, about how heroes don't quit. Elias watched the tree line, watched the sky, watched for any sign of pursuit. The minutes crawled past like hours. 10 minutes, 12, 14. At minute 15, Yukon lifted his head. At minute 16, he got his front legs under him. At minute 17, he stood. The wolf swayed, trembling with the effort, but he was standing. He looked at Maya first, then at Elias, and something passed between the three of them that had no name in any human language. Recognition. Respect. Goodbye. "Go," Elias said softly. "Go before I change my mind and try to keep you safe." Yukon took one step, then another. Each movement was painful, obvious even through the white fur, but he kept going. Away from the truck, away from the humans who'd saved him and imprisoned him and saved him again. Toward the dark line of trees and the wild country beyond. He stopped at the tree line, turned back one last time. His amber eyes caught the sunlight and held it, burning bright. Then he tilted his head back and released, a sound that echoed across the valley, a howl that spoke of survival and defiance and promises kept. Then he was gone, swallowed by the forest like he'd never existed at all. Maya buried her face in Elias's coat and sobbed. He held her and watched the spot where Yukon had disappeared, and wondered if they'd just witnessed a miracle or a death sentence. 1 year later, Elias stood in the same clearing where he'd last seen Yukon. But this time, he wasn't alone. Maya was taller now, 9 years old, and still carrying that pink backpack everywhere she went. Her parents had finalized their divorce 6 months ago, and the custody arrangement meant she spent every other weekend with Elias. She'd asked to come here every single visit, like a pilgrim returning to a shrine. "Do you think he made it?" she asked for the 100th time. Elias didn't answer right away. He'd learned that some questions didn't need immediate responses, that silence could hold more truth than words. The forest had changed with the seasons. Spring had brought new growth, summer had thickened the underbrush, fall had painted everything gold and red, and now winter was settling in again, familiar and cold. But some things remained constant. The mountains, the wind, the stories hunters told in bars when they'd had enough whiskey to loosen their tongues. Stories about traps that got sprung in the night with nothing caught but air. About a white ghost that moved through the high country like smoke, always one step ahead of rifles and cameras. About a pack that had appeared in territory that had been empty for decades, led by something that shouldn't exist. "Bill Cooper told me something interesting last week," Elias said finally. "Said a hunter from Jackson came through, real shook up. Claimed he saw a white wolf the size of a small bear leading a pack of 6 or 7 others. Said it looked right at him through his scope, and he couldn't pull the trigger. Said those eyes were too intelligent, too knowing. Like shooting it would be murder instead of hunting." Maya's face lit up. "That was Yukon. I know it was. Maybe. Or maybe it was just a story. Hunters exaggerate." "You don't believe that?" No, he didn't. Because 3 weeks ago, Elias had found something on his morning walk. A deer carcass, freshly killed and gutted, left at the edge of his property line. The kill was clean, professional, the work of an apex predator that knew exactly what it was doing. And in the snow around it, paw prints. Large ones. White fur caught on a nearby branch. He hadn't told Maya about that. Hadn't told anyone. Some things were meant to be kept private. Sacred even. A message between 2 survivors who'd both learned that living required sacrifice and that freedom had teeth. They stood in the clearing for another 20 minutes. Maya hoping for a glimpse of white fur among the trees. Elias content just to breathe the cold air and remember. Eventually, the sun started to drop behind the mountains and the temperature plummeted. "We should head back," Elias said. "Got a long drive." 5 more minutes. He gave her 10. As they walked back to the truck, Maya stopped suddenly, grabbed his arm. "Grandpa, look." On a ridge about 200 yards away, backlit by the dying sun, stood a wolf. White as fresh snow, larger than any wolf had a right to be, watching them with eyes that caught the light like coins. It wasn't alone. Behind it, half hidden in the shadows of the pines, other shapes moved. The pack. His pack. Maya raised her hand in a wave. The white wolf didn't move, didn't acknowledge the gesture in any way a stranger would recognize. But Elias saw the slight tilt of its head, the momentary pause before it turned away. Recognition. Remembrance. Then the wolf was gone, leading its pack deeper into the wilderness, and the ridge was empty except for gathering darkness. They drove home in comfortable silence. Maya fell asleep against the window, and Elias navigated the mountain roads with practiced ease, his mind on the past and future in equal measure. Vance Holbrook had left the state after Tom Bradley's investigation. Charges were filed, but never stuck. Men like Vance always found a way to slip through the cracks. But word had gotten around about what happened, about the home invasion and the wolf that fought back. Hunters gave Elias's property a wide berth now. Respect or fear, it didn't matter which. The cabin came into view, smoke rising from the chimney. He'd fixed the door, replaced the generator fuel line, patched the bullet hole in the ceiling. Physical repairs were easy. The other kind took longer. Maya woke up as he pulled into the driveway. "Do you think we'll see him again?" "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe that was his way of saying goodbye. I hope we do. I want to tell him thank you." "I think he knows." Inside, Elias made hot chocolate, while Maya sat at the kitchen table doing homework. The normalcy of it felt precious and fragile, a gift they'd nearly lost in the storm and chaos of that terrible week. Later, after Maya was asleep in the guest room, Elias stood on the porch and looked out at the forest. The night was clear and cold, stars sharp as broken glass overhead. Somewhere out there, Yukon was doing the same thing, standing on some high ridge, looking down at the valley, remembering. 2 survivors, 2 warriors, connected by blood and choice and a moment in time when their paths had crossed and changed everything. The wind carried a sound from far away, so faint Elias almost missed it. A howl, triumphant and wild and absolutely free. He smiled and went back inside, closing the door on the cold and the dark and the mountains that held their secrets close. Some legends were meant to stay legends. Some kings were never meant to be tamed. And somewhere in the high country of the Rockies, a white wolf that shouldn't exist continued to exist anyway, proving that sometimes the impossible was just another word for alive. So that's the story. That's how a stubborn old man, a broken little girl, and a wolf that refused to die found each other in the middle of nowhere and changed everything. Some folks say I made the whole thing up, that wolves don't act like that, that wild things can't choose loyalty over instinct. Maybe they're right, or maybe they've just never been desperate enough to see what's possible when everything else falls away. I'd love to hear what you think. Have you ever saved something wild? Or has something wild ever saved you? Drop a comment below and tell me your story. I read every single one, and trust me, at my age, I've got plenty of time. And if you want to hear more stories like this, real stories about real people facing impossible choices in places where the law doesn't reach and nature doesn't forgive, hit that subscribe button. I've got a lot more to tell you. Stories about survival, about sacrifice, about the thin line between civilization and chaos. Because out here in the mountains, that line gets crossed every single day. Thanks for listening. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is show mercy. And sometimes it's the only thing worth doing. See you in the next one.